Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Chilling Risks of Winter, How to Prepare Your Property for the Unexpected, a conversation designed to help you protect your home and property from severe winter weather. I'm Mary McGuire, Director of Public and Government Affairs at AAA Northeast, and if you've ever had basement flooding, as I have, an ice dam, or had a tree, yours or your neighbor's, fall on your home, your shed, your garage, or your vehicle, this webinar is for you. I can tell you that unfortunately, I've experienced a number of these weather mishaps in my home, especially when it comes to tree damage. So if you're worried about this happening to you and want to be sure you're taking preventive measures and are properly insured for anything Mother Nature may serve up this winter, you are in the right place. Because we are bringing together 4 experts from throughout our AAA insurance territory to answer all your questions and my questions this morning. We are joined today by Joan Donovan, Senior Insurance Agent based in New York. Joan has been with AAA Insurance for more than 5 years. Israel Delgado, Senior Insurance Sales Agent based in New Jersey with the club for 7 years now. Scott Richards, Regional Manager of Internal Insurance Sales at our Rhode Island headquarters and a 22-year veteran of AAA Insurance. And Mitika Kathuria, Insurance Sales Leader in Massachusetts, who has been with AAA now for 5 years. So welcome to all of you. For our audience, just so you know, this webinar is being recorded. And audience members, please feel free to enter any questions you have during this conversation into the chat on your screen, and we will certainly do our best to get answers for you during the broadcast. So Scott, let's get started by talking about prevention with you. We all know that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, as the saying goes. Based on what I've seen this fall, both from my own experience driving around during some of the big storms we've had, as well as on the news, tree damage is very, very common here in New England. Lots of wooded areas, trees hitting homes and power lines. So should people have trees near their homes removed as a preventive measure?
I think it doesn't hurt. I mean, I think definitely removing dead limbs, if you take a survey around your property and look for any dead limbs or any dead trees, that's just really an important part of home maintenance. And especially if they're close or overhanging, any structures or properties, because not only can, if they fall down or if a big limb comes down on the house or a structure, can they damage the property, but also it creates an environment for mold, for moss to grow on the roof, and that will deteriorate the roof and cost the homeowner a lot more money over time in roof replacements, because their roof will not last as long and potentially can leak because the moss and things on the roof store in water and things that damage the roof shingles. So I would definitely take a periodic review of your property and make sure that you're keeping up on your home maintenance and on the trees and the dead tree limbs.
I've never thought about moss on the roof. I think a lot of people probably haven't, and I think a lot of people are reluctant to do tree removal because it's very expensive. But you point out that over the long run, given the damage or potential damage to a roof, it probably makes sense to have some of that tree removal done. What if a tree falls on your home, your garage, or your shed, Scott? Are you generally covered for that kind of damage under your insurance policy?
Oh yeah. You're generally covered. Normally, we'd go through your own home insurance. Typically it's an act of God or whatever. It'd be subject to your deductible, whatever you chose for a deductible for your homeowner's policy, and they would cover the repairs, of the damage to the home or the property, and possibly also the tree removal as well. Typically, even if it's your neighbor's property or, that a tree falls down on, it'll still be your home insurance that will be initially responding to the claim or the loss. And then if warranted, they can go after the other, your neighbor's insurance policy for recuperation or subrogate to get the lost payment back.
Interesting. Okay, we did have 3 or 4 trees belonging to our neighbors fall into our yard 2 years ago, and we actually didn't file a claim. We just took care of it. But so that's interesting. So you can file a claim, and it's possible that your neighbor's insurance may respond.
Yeah, usually it's going to be your own insurance. If your neighbor's insurance to respond, they would have to prove some type of neglect, that they knew the tree was rotted and they've been contacted multiple times and they didn't remove it. So most of the time it's going to be your own insurance handling that.
Okay, I don't like looking at all the snow in that picture. It's too early. It's going to be
Definitely,
47 degrees today, so we all
definitely, yeah.
have to enjoy it. So what if a tree falls on your car? We've seen so many trees this past fall with some of the big storms that we've had, even some tornadoes, for example, in Connecticut and Massachusetts. We've seen a lot of trees falling on cars. Is that something that's generally covered, Scott?
It really depends on, it'll come under your car insurance, not your homeowner's insurance. So it depends on what you have for coverage on your car. That would fall under the comprehensive coverage, which is sometimes also called other than collision. And they would cover the damages to your vehicle, whatever's over that $500 or that $1,000 deductible or whatever you chose on your homeowner's policy. I mean, on your auto insurance policy. So it really depends on, what you carry on your vehicle and what the deductible is.
So, that's good to know in terms of the auto policy coverage. One of the questions that we often get is if there's a power outage and you lose a fridge full of food, is that something that would be covered under your insurance, Scott?
It really depends on the policy you have. There is a coverage called refrigerated property coverage or refrigerated food spoilage coverage. Some policies that we have or that other carriers have include it automatically. Other times it may be an optional endorsement or rider that you have to carry on your homeowner's policy. It's definitely something you'd want to check with your agent about to see that you have, because it can be a very beneficial coverage. It may have no deductible or a very low deductible and cover up to a minimal amount of food spoilage, typically anywhere between $500 and $1,000 of food spoilage.
Okay, so that's great to know. We have a generator at home. It's a small generator, but it's enough to power our refrigerator in the kitchen, in the basement, and probably one computer and a lamp or something like that. Do you recommend that people get generators in the Northeast?
Definitely. I mean, especially if you're in a rural area. I mean, I live in a rural area in Connecticut, and we lose power a lot. And I tell you, I have a generator and it comes in handy. Definitely keeps the power on. I mean, you don't need to spend a lot of money on a generator, just enough to keep a refrigerator going or a freezer going. And that can, save you a lot of headaches and potential money out of pocket if you lose a lot of food or, spoilage. And where I am, to be honest, it's great too, because I am on well water, and a generator allows you to flush your toilets and have the well pump to work. So if you're in a rural area, it definitely is helpful. But even in a city, it can be very beneficial, so you don't lose all that meat and things like that, especially if you buy a lot in bulk.
Yeah, I hear you, Scott. It's been a lifesaver for us, and we have a well also. So I hear what you're saying. It really does make a big difference as long as you're using it safely.
Mhm.
So, Mitika, let's move on to flooding, which unfortunately has also been a very common occurrence here in the Northeast over the past couple of years. We've actually broken records for rainfall over the past year in many areas here in the Northeast. I'm thinking about New Jersey, Massachusetts, Connecticut. We've all had our share of heavy rain. So, Mitika, what about flooding from heavy rain? The basement seems to be the most troublesome area. Is that something that you can insure against in terms of damage?
Right. So heavy rainstorms do pose a serious risk of basement flooding, whether water is creeping in from the basement's foundation or from an overflowing sump pump. Most basements can be salvaged with proper flood remediation. I always like to remind the members that maintenance is key. Basement water damage can happen for a lot of reasons. Failed sump pump, aged or cracked foundation, damaged footing drains, improper gutting and sewer backup. So basically, there are quite a few tips that you can, follow to prevent your basement from flooding, like, checking your foundation for cracks, cleaning your gutters, checking for the grading, installing a sump pump and maintaining it. In terms of insurance, water damage inside the house is one of the most common insurance claims made on homeowners insurance policies. So it is important to understand how your home insurance policies cover the water damage. The policy will specify what it does and what it doesn't cover. So be sure to take a look at your policy and make sure that you are protected.
Yeah, great point about cleaning the gutters. We actually, with regard to the foundation, because we do have a finished basement at our home in Massachusetts, we installed gutter extensions that really carry the water away from the foundation. You know, they're about 10 feet long. And so those have been a real godsend for us over the years. But we also got a sump pump because we did have about 8 inches of water in our basement at one point, and I didn't realize that we actually live near the bottom of a floodplain, nor did my husband. So should everyone have a sump pump, Mitika?
That's a good question, Mary. So if you don't have a basement, I always say you don't need a sump pump. But if you own a house and you live in an area which is susceptible to excessive snow or rainfall, like the Northeast, a sump pump is a smart bet. Even if your basement doesn't flood, basement moisture can lead to mold and potential health problems. So it's important to ensure that your sump pump is working for those high moisture months.
Yeah, and we have a carpeted basement too. In fact, we had just carpeted it, of course, when the flooding occurred. So it's really important, as you indicate, to check underneath that carpeting for mold and to rip it up if you have to, that type of thing, because as you said, it can cause health problems. So I've heard that the sump pump should be elevated, Mitika, and that you should have a spare battery for it in case of a power outage. Can you talk about that?
Sure. So sump pump, yes, definitely. You want to ensure that your sump pump doesn't sit on debris such as silt or gravel, which could be sucked into the pump, ruining your motor. So instead, you want to place it on a steady flat bricks or a stand to raise the pump intake a couple of inches away from the bottom of the pit. So elevation is definitely helpful when it comes to sump pump. Battery backup, definitely. Sump pump battery backup systems are often called as two-state systems. So when your home's power is on, the sump pump will use electricity to power the pump. But in cases where there's lightning and wind, it can knock out power, and that could cause the sump pump to stop working when you need it the most. So therefore, battery backup pumps will kick on when the primary source of power is killed. So definitely having a battery backup sump pump is very, very advisable.
So good advice. And I've actually also heard recommendations that it's a good idea to not finish a basement here in the Northeast, at least to not put carpeting in it. Do you agree with that?
Definitely. I think with basements, investing into a finished basement in any flood zone, especially in Northeast, is something that you need to think about. If you live in a flood zone and you want a finished basement, it's worth finding out if what your home's flood risk is. Once you know your flood risk, you need to weigh the benefits of having extra living space against the cost of repairing or refinishing your basement if it sustains serious water damage. It's often not worth finishing a basement if your home is likely to be in flood multiple times over the course of your mortgage.
Yeah, and again, I didn't even realize that we live near the bottom of a floodplain until we had flooding. And so I've also got friends who live near a large pond and they get flooding, and they have now elevated all of their basement appliances, oil burner, furnace, etc., up on cinder blocks. Is that a good idea for people? Because again, I know that as part of this conversation, we want to stress preventive measures that can lead to not filing a claim if you've really thought things out carefully ahead of time.
Yes, definitely, Mary. And I was in a similar situation myself when I was a new homeowner many years ago. So if you definitely live in a flood-prone area, you should take preventive measures to protect your home against water damage. Flood waters usually prove deadly for furnaces, your HVAC equipment, including your air conditioners, your water heaters, your boilers. So all these sensitive electronics inside can be damaged because of water, and then rust can eventually form. So to save your furnace from water damage, you should elevate it and ensure that it is way higher than the highest possible flood water level in your basement.
Okay, all great advice. And one final question for you. I've also heard it recommended that when you are out shopping for a home, and we know that we've seen record home sales here in the Northeast over the past year during the pandemic, I've heard it recommended that if you're shopping for a home, these are really important things to consider. Will you get flooding? Will you have to purchase expensive flood insurance? Will you have damage to your home? Is that something to think about when you're shopping for real estate?
Definitely. You know, buyers are often hesitant to buy a house located in a flood zone, and that kind of makes sense because buying a home is a huge investment, and the chance of flooding puts that investment at risk. Plus, these properties can also be expensive to insure. Flood insurance is expensive. And also, when you're buying a house as an investment, you also have to think about the resale value. So all of these factors need to be considered when you're buying a house which is located in a flood zone. Water can be extremely destructive to a house. A single inch of flood water can cause up to, a lot of money in damage, according to the Federal Emergency Management Agency. It doesn't necessarily mean that you should avoid buying a house in these areas, but you definitely need to be prepared for the insurance cost and have a good understanding of what your risks are and how you can mitigate them.
Okay, so something to consider for sure if you are in the market for buying a home. All right, Minika, thank you. And we're going to move to Israel, and we're going to talk about ice damage with you. But before we launch into that, I do want to touch on the fact that you are one of a number of insurance agents at AAA Northeast who is fluent in Spanish. You're bilingual. And I'm just wondering, can you tell us what benefits that brings to the club, Israel, and how many Spanish-speaking members you talk to, for example, on a daily or monthly basis?
Yes, so we do have a line specifically for Spanish-speaking clients in New York and New Jersey that I am a part of. So when they call the number, you can just listen for for an agent in Spanish, click there, and then it'll get you over to a number of us. There's a couple of sales agents in both states and customer service representatives as well that could help. And it's a great benefit in terms of, one, if you're only a Spanish speaker, you have somebody that you could speak to. And even if you speak English, but English is your second language, and you feel more comfortable speaking to somebody in Spanish, where you're going to understand more of the insurance. Insurance is a lot of information, a lot of specific information. So you want to make sure that you're understanding everything as best as possible. So sometimes, it's good even for English as a second language to speak to somebody in Spanish to get all those particulars as detailed as possible. And to feel as comfortable as possible in that situation. In terms of how many a week, I would say maybe 2 or 3 a week. It depends on the week. Sometimes, sometimes a few a day, sometimes a couple a week. It does depend on the week, but especially in the area that where I'm in Union, New Jersey, we do have a good amount of Spanish-speaking clients, so it does come in handy.
Yeah, so really a great service, I think, Israel, and a real benefit to people. And as you say, so much detailed, specific information, a lot of numbers, that type of thing. So I'm sure it's a tremendous help for our Spanish-speaking members. So on to the ice dams. I remember a few years ago, everyone in New England seemed to be battling an ice dam. I don't even like the sound of ice dam because I remember all of the news stories and all of my friends who had problems during that time. So how can we prevent ice dams, and is the damage they cause generally covered under most insurance?
So the definition of an ice dam is basically what it's caused by snow that on your roof. Heat escapes from the ceiling through the roof, melts the snow, it ends up in your gutter, and then it'll refreeze at that point. The snow, either slushy snow or water coming down, and it refreezes in your gutter. And that could cause a lot of issues in terms of just the weight and damage that it's doing on your gutter, any kind of other seepage, to the roof, or a number of issues like that. It would be covered. Anything weather related in that way is covered. But and the best way to prevent that is to make sure that you have proper insulation in your attic. That would be very helpful. Making sure that you don't have any kind of leaking or seepage. Good insulation around the vent area, making sure that's sealed properly so nothing escapes from there. The other thing to do is to make sure that if you do see snow starting to slide down into your gutter area, do the best you can. Again, this depends on how high your roof is and how high you are off the ground, whether with a broom or something, whatever you could use to try to clear off the snow out of your gutters as best as possible, or the front, the lowest part of your roof as best as possible. Keep that as clear as you can. A couple of other things that you could do to make sure that any issues for snow or weight or ice, preventative before it even starts to snow. Take a look at your gutters. Take a look. It's always a good idea anyway to look around your house for any kind of you may see a shingle that's missing. You may see a damaged shingle, or you may see a gutter that's loose in an area. You may have some blocking in the piping coming down from the gutter. So you're going to want to make sure that that's always clear, so that moisture or water can travel down that way instead of just getting stuck into the gutter. If you have a loose gutter somewhere, you want to make sure that you have that repaired as best as possible. So that area, that weaker area, is going to be more susceptible to weight from snow or ice. Same thing with the shingle. You want to make sure that if you do notice a shingle that may be missing or damaged, it's a lot easier to have that repaired now than it is to have to deal with a leak that you may get from rain or snow later on.
And we talked about that in terms of preventive measures. I think Scott mentioned it early on, that taking a walk around your house,
Right.
and really sort of surveying what's going on regularly. It's amazing what we walk by every day sometimes and don't notice. So just doing that inspection a few times a year, I think, really makes sense. Israel, it seems to me that the worst ice dams that I can remember happened during that terrible winter of, I think it was 2015, 2016, when we had 110 inches of snow in Boston. I think we had the most snowfall of anywhere in the country, which is pretty incredible, even more than Buffalo that year. But I remember many ice dams that year and many freezing and sub-freezing temperatures. Is that when we typically see ice dams occurring? It's not really an annual occurrence, is it?
Right. It would be more during the heavier snowstorms, especially if it starts to be cold for quite amount of time, under freezing temperatures, quite amount of time after that. Because again, anything that does melt, once it gathers into your gutters, it will refreeze if the temperature is below freezing. So if you start to break out of the colder weather after a snowstorm, things start to melt away. It's a little, it won't refreeze, but it's typically when you have snow, but there's still a lot of colder weather coming up. So you'll have a lot of that refreezing. And again, it can cause issues, even just liability, in terms of, big icicles hanging down, or any kind of damage of a gutter. If the weight on the gutter is too strong and it comes down, if there's somebody walking by, that's a liability issue as well. So there's a lot of different issues that could occur from there. But typically, yes, once if you have a lot of freezing temperatures after the snowstorm, that's when you're liable to see it a little bit more.
Okay, all good points. So, one of the other things we've experienced here in New England, and hopefully, by the way, we'll have a nice mild winter this winter. We won't have to deal with ice dams or any of these things. My fingers are crossed. I'm sure yours are as well. But one of the things that we've seen with much of the extreme weather we've experienced in recent years is high winds, unusually high winds, in some cases hurricane force winds in many communities around the Northeast. What about protecting your roof, your shingles, wind damage? Is that something that's covered under insurance?
Yeah, so wind damage is covered. There are some companies or some carriers that, depending on how close you are to the water or whatever the case may be where you are, if you're more susceptible to issues like that, they may have a separate wind deductible, or they may have a separate hurricane deductible if the storm, once it hits landfall, if it's considered a hurricane, there would be a separate deductible where, for instance, if you have a $1,000 deductible as your regular all peril deductible on your home, but you have let's say a 2% hurricane deductible, that means if it's a hurricane, that deductible now is no longer $1,000. It's now 2% of your dwelling coverage. So something to take a look at there. So if you have, if your house is $500,000, 2% of that is a whole lot more than $1,000 deductible. It does, having that kind of deductible for wind or hurricane does help you with the premium a little bit, but it's also, you have to take into account how much you're going to have to pay later on in a claim if the deductible ends up being high. But again, some areas you don't really have the choice. Some areas, if you're close to an area that's susceptible to wind or hurricane, that deductible will be required. But most of the time, it wouldn't be.
Okay, great. All good information. Thank you, Israel, so much. And Joan, we're going to move on to you. And, we've spent a lot of time this morning talking about homeowners insurance, but I think a lot of people who rent, who live in an apartment or a condo, overlook the importance of renters insurance. Can you tell us about that, what it is, how it works, and why it's important?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm based in our office in Manhattan, so I sell quite a few renters insurance policies. And the funny thing is that a lot of people who call to purchase it really just call because they're required to by the building that they live in. They're required to carry it, and they don't really understand what it does for them. It does a couple of things. First and foremost, it's going to pay for your personal belongings, so everything you move in with, if there is a covered claim and those items are lost. So that's your bed, your furniture, your clothing, your kitchen items. All of those things are costly and they add up. So first and foremost, you have coverage for that. Secondly, you have loss of use or additional living expenses. So I personally went through this years ago. I lived in Manhattan and I had a very bad fire in my apartment. I had very little because I had just moved in, but I didn't have a place to stay. So additional living expenses will provide you with some coverage so that you either are able to stay in a hotel for short term, or it will give you additional funds so that you can stay in a sublet, something like that. And then the third piece of the equation with the renter's policy is the liability. So if somebody is injured in your apartment or you cause damage to somebody that you are liable for, you have coverage. You won't have to pay out of pocket. So that's the basic policy. And once people understand it and they understand what a bargain it is, I always tell people it's the biggest bargain that we can offer you in New York. Typically, a policy is going to be about $200 to $250 a year. You can add in some extra features to a policy, which is what we do at AAA to give you additional protection. Water backup, so if there's a leak somewhere and your belongings are damaged, you can file a claim for that. We also include something in New York, and I'm sure we do in our other states as well, called off-premises theft. So if you have any theft that occurs away from your apartment, so maybe you have something in your car, or maybe you're traveling through the airport and your luggage is taken, you can actually file a claim through your renter's insurance policy if you carry this endorsement. So I, tell everybody, even if you're just starting out and you feel like all I have is my suitcase and an air mattress, you still need renter's insurance. It's really, really important.
Well, that's so interesting. I did not realize that if your luggage is stolen at the airport, that can actually be covered under your renter's policy, correct?
If you carry that endorsement of off-premises theft, any theft away from your apartment is covered. If you don't carry it, then you don't have that coverage, but it's very nominal cost to include it.
Well, that's great. And again, you also mentioned that if you have items stolen from your car, those could be covered under your renter's policy as well.
That's right. That's right.
Huh, that is really terrific. I did not realize that, and that's great advice. Do you think that renter's insurance is something that's often overlooked? For example, in one of my first apartments when I was in my 20s, I had my pipes freeze and I had a flood in my kitchen. I had been away for a couple of days. Is that something that would typically be covered by renter's insurance?
So, and when you're renting, you don't actually own the structure, right? So if there is damage from pipes that burst or anything like that with the structure, typically that's going to be covered under the actual policy for the building. So whoever owns the building is going to have the policy that will pay to repair those situations. But you may not have coverage for your personal belongings that are damaged from, for example, flooding. So in a situation like that. So that's where the renter's insurance comes into play. Now I'm talking about apartments now and condos. If it's a single family home and you're renting that and you go away and don't leave the heat on and there's some sort of an event, then that would be possibly a different situation because you would have some liability in that event.
Okay, well, all great information. And I didn't realize really until we talked that if you are displaced from your apartment for some reason not of your own fault, that you will get coverage for a hotel room stay or something like that. So that's great to know. I think a lot of people don't realize that. So thank you, Joan. So we do have an audience question, which I think is really a good one right now. And the question is, and Scott, I'll put this to you since we talked about trees with you at the outset of this webinar. Does home insurance cover a large down tree removal if it does not hit the house, shed, or any other structure? Great question.
Yeah, that's absolutely a great question. And to be honest, it really depends on the carrier. Every carrier handles that differently. Many carriers require it to have damaged the structure or be blocking a driveway or an entryway in order to pay for the removal of the tree, but some carriers will cover it even if it's down in the backyard. So that's a specific question. You really need to check with your insurance agent and check with your current insurance policy on how they cover down trees.
Let's talk about that, and let's do a little bit of a round robin and get your general suggestions for making the most of your insurance policy. And really, let's start with that, Scott. Is it a good idea, for example, to have an annual conversation with your insurance agent if anything has changed, or if you just need to do a kind of a recap of what's going on with your home? Does that make sense for most people?
Absolutely. I would definitely periodically, whether it's annually or biannually, check with your agent and just review your policy. Carriers come out with changes, new discounts, things like that, that maybe can be applied if we review it. Maybe circumstances have changed and we can save you some money with a different deductible or different coverages. Anytime there's any kind of a significant change, maybe you add an addition or do some renovations on your property, you definitely want to reach out to your agent right away so that we can confirm that we're giving you the proper coverage. Life changes. You get married or engaged. Maybe you get an engagement ring. Perfect time to reach out to your agent because there are some limitations on theft of jewelry and watches and firearms and silverware, goldware, things like that, that you can buy additional coverage and, especially on that engagement ring or something so that it's properly covered if something happens.
And Joan, you were talking about jewelry riders and protection for jewelry leading up to this webinar. We talked about that. What's important for people to know who may have some valuable jewelry, to Scott's point about an engagement ring or something that might require additional insurance?
Right. So it's really important that when you are purchasing a policy, or as Scott mentioned, you may have a life change, you receive an engagement ring or you receive a fabulous holiday gift, something like that, that you do reach out to your agent and you talk to them about what you have. It might be jewelry, it might be artwork, it might be camera equipment. There's all different kinds of things that we can add on to a policy, but a basic policy is going to have limitations. So you might be very upset to find out that if you have an item that is stolen, that's worth $5,000 and your limit on your policy is $500, you're really not going to be made whole again. So I would tell people that if you do have a valuable item that you'd like to include as a rider or just do a separate personal article floater, to have a receipt, keep a copy of the receipt, or if you don't have a receipt, get an appraisal so that you have something to fall back on. And many carriers will also require to see this in order to provide coverage to you. But it's an easy thing to do and well worth it.
I've heard it's a good idea to videotape your apartment, your condo, or your home, especially to videotape those most valuable objects. And what about electronics? A lot of people have very expensive electronics in their homes.
Yeah, so certainly computers, there are limits on computers as well, but yes, there's electronic coverage that you would want to add, make it more robust. You can do additional coverage for electronic items. And you're right, I mean, it seems to me that no matter what happens, you'll always somehow have your cell phone in your hand, no matter what disaster happens. So I do tell people to go around your apartment, video the room, video what you have. If you have, for example, a computer or a TV, you can actually zoom in on it. You can take an image or the video of the back of it, the serial number to see what it is, so that if something does happen, you'll be able to sort of know what you had. Even better is to do an inventory of what you have, but I think people tend to be busy and don't always do that. So this is something that you can fall back on, so that if you do have a loss, a fire, for example, it's really hard to remember all of the things that you did have. So this will help you to sort of recreate that list and sort of file your claim appropriately.
Good advice. And by the way, if any other members of our audience have questions that are popping into your heads, feel free to put those questions in the chat and we'll get them answered for you by our experts. So Mitika, you know, it's interesting. We've really had prevention as a thread running through this conversation. And recently in Wellesley, Massachusetts, there have been a great number of break-ins. And it's been reported that the homes that were broken into were unlocked, that people had not locked their doors, they hadn't locked their windows. And, you know, given that this is the time of year when people are buying gifts for people, that they might have some extra valuable items in their homes, is locking your door something that, you know, is an important preventive measure against theft?
Definitely. You know, if especially around the holidays, like you said, you know, people are buying gifts, they're storing gifts. This is that time of the year where you want to be very careful, whether you're leaving your personal property in your house or whether you're leaving it in your car. You want to make sure that you're, you know, you're keeping them locked. If you have special items that are, you know, worth protecting, you want to also invest into a security system. They're not very expensive. You can install door sensors and security system in the house that you can actually access from your phone or from your you know, in person, and they also give you that peace of mind that you are protected and you're safe.
So we actually have a follow-up question to that from one of our viewers, and that is, does having a security system, an alarm system in your home, lower your insurance premium?
That's a great question, Mary. So yes, if you do have a security system installed in your house and you are able to provide a certificate to your insurance agent, they will be able to go ahead and apply a further discount to you. I think different companies have different discounts. I know with AAA, some of the discounts vary between 5 to 8%.
Okay, that's great information. I did not realize that. So Israel, I'm going to turn to you, and we have another audience question, which is terrific. Keep them coming, please. We have a viewer who is asking, personal items stolen from your car, who covers that? Homeowners or auto insurance? I think Joan touched on that a bit, but Israel, if you can recap that for us, that would be great.
Yes, so that would actually be covered under your homeowners or renters insurance, whichever it may be. There is no content coverage on an auto insurance policy, but for, again, anything that you own that's your personal contents, whether it's in your car, whether you're on vacation, and you have something stolen, so on and so forth, that would all be covered under your homeowners. So yeah, that always goes to homeowners or renters, not to the auto policy.
Okay, terrific. And we have another audience question, which is wonderful. Keep them coming. That's what this conversation is all about, answering members' questions. So Joan, I'll put this one to you. What is the best method to waterproof your basement? Do you have any tips? And we've talked a little bit about this. We talked about being careful about carpeting, about elevating your furnace and other appliances, about getting a sump pump. But what other advice do you have, Joan?
Well, there are companies that can come out and do an evaluation for you. If you do see things like cracks in your foundation, if you do get just a normal rainstorm and you see water coming in or dampness on the walls, that can indicate that there is an issue. So there are professional companies that can come out and give you advice. Sometimes there's a coating that they can put on the walls. But I would say definitely have a professional come out and assess, because sometimes it can be an indication of a bigger problem, the settling of the foundation, or an issue that might require, you know, mitigation, basically.
Okay,
I
great
know I
advice.
had some water issues in my basement, you know, and French drains, you know, installed around the exterior to get the water away, along with the sub pumps, is huge. Definitely, like Joanne said, cracks in the basement. There's like a two-pot epoxy that they can put in. It hardens almost like a plastic that will fill in cracks and keep the cracks from leaking as well. And there are many, again, companies out there that will do the basement waterproofing, and whether it's on the outside of the walls or the inside of the walls, but getting the water away is the first step.
Yeah, you know, Scott, I remember when we were raising our kids, I had 3 children under the age of 5, and I always used to joke with my husband that we needed a French drain in our kitchen after they were done eating, because I just wanted to hose down the entire kitchen. So the French drain idea is a great one. We have about 5 minutes left in this conversation, so I'm going to give each of you a minute or two to really add whatever you think is the best insurance tip for people to know. And Mitika, I will start with you. What do you think it's important for people to remember?
Maintenance definitely is a key. I always stress on that. If you are a homeowner, make sure that you're maintaining the home. Flooded basements often requires professional water cleanup. Keep in mind that just because the water is gone doesn't necessarily mean that the problem has been fixed. Because these unresolved issues in your home structure can lead to continuous basement flooding, which we do not want. So, and very expensive damage control as well. So make sure that, you're maintaining your home, especially in the winter months. You're checking your home's heating and air conditioning system. You're cleaning your gutters, you're cleaning your drainage. Make sure you test your smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. We actually just did ours last week, and one of our carbon monoxide detectors in our basement storage room was faulty. So we had to call and the fire department, and they came and they replaced it. So these are things that you need to be careful about, and you want to make sure that you check these and prevent these before a damage occurs.
You're right. That's so important. Smoke detectors, carbon monoxide detectors, that is really a great tip, especially if you are using a generator or something like that, which Scott and I talked about. You know, Scott, I'm just looking at our list here on the screen, and one thing we haven't touched on is home prep before leaving for vacation. And, I do think that's so important. I remember once we were going to Cape Cod, and my husband fortunately left with a second car after I departed. And it turned out that we had a pipe that was about to burst in our basement, the basement again, and he heard water running as he was leaving and was able to catch it and called a plumber, who told us that if we had left and gone on vacation, we would probably have had about $40,000 in damage to our home. So is that something people should also keep in mind if they're leaving for a trip?
Absolutely, definitely. I mean, one of the most common claims we get in insurance is somebody's away on vacation, or it's a secondary home, and they turn the temperature too far down in the home, trying to save money on, the oil or the gas bill, and unfortunately, it ends up costing them way more money in repair bills because a pipe bursts or something along those lines. You definitely want to, you can turn down the thermostat, but you don't want to turn off the heat. You want to keep it somewhat warm in the house so that the pipes don't burst. We've talked about this previously, is also opening cabinets and things so that the air can get at some of the pipes that are maybe in the cupboards, maybe letting a drip go, on your faucet so that the water keeps dripping, so that it doesn't stay stagnant in the pipe and freeze. There are also wraps that you can plug in that wrap around a pipe to keep it warm, and only kind of warm up the pipe if it gets below a certain temperature. If you have some pipes that are maybe in a more exposed area that catch some cold. I know I have one in my basement where it's exposed a little bit to some cool air in the basement, and I have one of those pipes plugged in, and it turns on, warms up the water just so that the pipe doesn't freeze and burst. So all those kind of things are great. Also timers on your lights and things like that, because we're not only just talking about the cold weather, but also your house can be targeted while you're away. So having some type of timers on your lights and somebody to check in on the house periodically can be great too.
Somebody to pick up the mail, right? And the
You bet.
newspapers. Yeah, great advice. Israel, what about you? Some final words of wisdom that you think people should carry with them going forward?
Yes, also in terms of winter weather, you're responsible if somebody slips and falls on the sidewalk in front of your house or around your property. So it's always very important that after a snowfall, or even during the snowfall, if it's going to be heavy, if you don't want to wait to the end, go out there and periodically and shovel to make sure that the sidewalk is clear. It's not a bad idea in terms of, especially if it's going to be, if the weather gets below freezing for a while afterwards again, to put a little bit of salt on your sidewalk. Now, it's very important to take a look at before the winter, make sure your sidewalk doesn't have a lot of cracks or any cracks really, because a lot of salt can do damage to your pavement. after a while, especially if there's already existing cracks where the salt could get in there. So, but a little bit of salt in a pavement that's in good shape definitely doesn't hurt in terms of eliminating or avoiding ice. Because if anybody falls and gets hurt on your property, that's a liability claim that you would be responsible for.
Okay, well, an important suggestion there. So thank you, Israel, for that. And Joan, I actually am going to give you the last question because we have an audience question that just came in. And the question is, what is the name of the professional who comes to waterproof or check your basement? Is it just a contractor or is there a specialist who does this kind of work?
I'm actually going to ask Scott on that one since I'm in the city and I don't do that much of that. I want to make sure that we give the right information to this person who's asking the question.
Okay.
I would go with a specialist. There are companies that specialize in waterproofing basements. I would trust that much more than just a general contractor, jack of all trades type thing. Typically they will come out and they will assess the basement for the low areas, the high areas, talk about sub pumps, talk about drainage. Sometimes the drainage may be inside the basement, sometimes it's external as well. Also sealing the walls, things like that. There may even be different types of flooring that they add in, where the flooring in the basement is raised up so that if you do get a little bit of water in the basement, it's not affecting the carpets and things. The water runs under sort of a plastic raised base or whatever. So there's a lot of different products out there and techniques to help mitigate water to be able to expand your living area. But you definitely want to probably reach out to a waterproofing specialist or someone who specializes in finishing basements that might be in a water-prone area.
Okay, well, thank you, Scott and Joan, and thank you all. You've really been a font of information today, and I want to thank our audience for all of these great questions, because that's what it's all about, getting your questions answered so you can better protect yourselves and your homes and your apartments and your property. I know I've learned a lot from our 4 knowledgeable speakers today. Thank you to all of you and to our audience today for joining us. I hope you all have a happy and healthy holiday season. And we were talking about gifts. I hope you get some great holiday gifts. And we certainly hope that the information we've provided you with today keeps you and your family and property safer and more secure in the new year. For AAA Northeast, I'm Mary McGuire. Thanks for joining us and have a great day, everyone. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Thank you all. You did a great job.
Thank you.